Canada is home to the most hectares of sustainably certified forests in the world. Canadian forestry supports hundreds of thousands of jobs across the country, and it also enables us to produce some of the most highly in-demand forest products in the world. So why aren't we building with them more? In this episode, I'm joined by Rick Jeffery, the president and CEO of the Canadian Wood Council, and we're going to talk all about growing domestic demand for Canadian forest products and why that's an amazing thing that we should be doing even more of. I can't wait to share this episode with you. As always, I'm your host, Aspen Dudzic, and this is Forestry Talks. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation and making the time. If you could maybe start by sharing with us a little bit about what the Canadian Wood Council is and what's your role within it.
Yeah, sure. The Canadian Wood Council is a industry trade association. We're based in Ottawa. We're pan-Canadian, so we represent the lumber, panel, engineered wood manufacturers all across the country. Canadian Wood Council's mandate and remit is to grow demand for wood. And we grow demand for wood by working with architects, engineers, construction companies, developers, municipalities, governments, and others to demonstrate to them and make them aware that they can build with wood. And then we provide them technical support to help them build with wood. And the idea here is that we can get more wood into construction in Canada. And that's a very important thing. I kind of look at it like a triple word score. On one hand, we get more wood into construction, which means we're decarbonizing the built environment, which is one of the biggest greenhouse gas emitters. But we're also, getting affordable housing solutions to governments. And what people might be surprised to know that the most cost-effective housing unit you can build in Canada is a 5 or 6 floor light wood frame apartment building. So, so we can help on the affordable housing front as well. And then secondly, all our products come from sustainably managed forests. I love Alberta's forests.
We love them too.
So that we've got very, very sustainable forests. I've been in the business for like 40 years. My training is as a professional forester. I've had the opportunity to go all around the world and look at forestry in other jurisdictions. And I can tell you that nobody does it better than Canada.
Wow.
So products from sustainable forests, and then kind of the triple word score is providing jobs across rural and urban Canada. So it's great. So that's kind of what our remit is.
Yeah, I mean, Rick, that's amazing. There's so much that I want to dig into here. Of course, the theme of the podcast this year is forest products as solutions. So I'm hearing, solutions for affordability, solutions for climate change. I definitely want to unpack how Canada is doing it better than anyone else in your observations. But first, maybe if we can start, you said, you've got a 40-year career working in the sector, certainly some time with the Canadian Wood Council. How have you observed the demand for wood or the wood culture change in your career?
Well, we're a pretty innovative industry, Aspen, from forest planning to harvesting to manufacturing to application of our products. And so, over that 40 years, what I've seen is incredible innovation and adaptation across the entire supply chain about how we do stuff. I'm super proud to be part of the forest industry because of that. When I started, I learned, I went to the University of Alberta, by the way.
Shout out.
three pass European, forestry, and not do that now. We're very sophisticated in how we do forest planning and harvesting. On the product side, we've seen this amazing transformation of products, and then in our part of the world at CWC, application of those products. And so now we can go in BC and Ontario up to 18 floors with wood.
Yeah.
that would not have been even fathomable 10 years ago. So, we've seen this innovation in the products and innovation in the building systems, and that's expanded the application of where wood can be used and how it can be used.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you shared the example about BC and Ontario. We often reference the beautiful 18-story Brock Commons Tower at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. And, if they can do it, there's no reason that we can't here in Alberta. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that in Alberta, we have up to 12 stories wood construction we're allowed. What do you think, like, what lessons can Alberta learn from other jurisdictions like BC and Ontario and others that might be really embracing a wood culture?
Yeah, for sure. Shout out to Woodworks Alberta, which is all part of Alberta Forest Products.
Yeah.
We work very closely with them. They're leading in terms of, the 5 to 6 floor segment.
Mhm.
There's also, which is suits, as I said, suits itself to the affordability issue, but it also, they're beautiful buildings. We also see in Alberta schools, there's a big school program over the next 7 to 8 years. I think they want to build 30 plus schools. So there's a
Yeah.
big opportunity there for wood to be a part of the solution there. And so, Woodworks team in Alberta will be working there. They can take, their cues from BC. We've done a bunch of work on schools there, and how we can, make sure that wood has its applicable place in schools. There's indigenous buildings and
Hmm.
schools. There's an opportunity there. I think Alberta is a little bit of a trailblazer in that regard. You've got a project in East Village in Calgary, the EV 606 building. It's a hybrid building that's a combination of wood, steel, concrete, light wood frame. It's a world-class facility. So you
Hmm.
can take your cues from other places, but you're doing a pretty good job in Alberta, kind of leading the charge as well. What we find, especially as we go more vertical, is that um, you know, the first time through, people are, trailblazing it and trying to figure it out. Once they've gone through once, they've learned a lot, and they'll apply that to the second building and then the third building. And by the time you get to the third or fourth building, developers then find out that, they can do it cost effectively, and many of them don't go back, or
Hmm.
they shift to more wood. So, that kind of innovation, is happening in BC. BC has, lots and lots of tall buildings. I think we got more tall buildings in BC than there are in the rest of Canada combined.
Wow.
And so, we work closely with Rory and his team, to make sure that we're sharing our stories, sharing our experiences, and I think that's part of the magic of, the Wood Council and its partners, in the woodworks operations across the country.
Yeah, and really certainly appreciate the shout out to our friends Rory and Jerry at Woodworks Alberta. They are doing a fabulous job of trying to foster a wood culture here, and floating all the boats and giving folks all the information they need to be able to make that a reality. In particular, super excited about that opportunity with all of the schools that we are looking to build here in Alberta, and the role that sustainably produced wood products can play in that. We've talked certainly lots on previous episodes about also the value of having more nature in the built environment and what that does in a learning environment and a healing environment, to be, have all that exposed wood in that space. So really excited about those opportunities.
Yeah, there's great biophilic advantages of wood in terms of, like you say, learning experiences, comfort. We're finding that when we talk to people who are building taller wood apartment buildings and condos, that they're able to rent those condos out for a higher rent
Hmm.
solely on the basis that there's exposed wood, and the exposed wood is beautiful, and people are willing to pay a little bit more money for that, which of course
Yeah.
helps the business case and helps, projects pencil out.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think there are also benefits on the construction job itself, if I'm not mistaken, and just about how much quicker those buildings can go up when they're built out of wood, and part of that is how light the material is.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things is speed of construction for sure. It's also when you think about building, especially in infill buildings or building on lots that'll have other buildings around. You don't have a lot of street space and things like that. So the more we can do with mass timber, offsite
Hmm.
construction, so that you're just bringing parts of the building in there. You don't need a lot of space in the street. It goes up quick. You're not disrupting your neighbors for a long period of
Yeah.
time. And again, that helps with the business case for the building in terms of being able to put it up faster.
Yeah, and to continue on the building front, the softwood lumber, the lumber that we produce here in Canada is called SPF, spruce pine fir, and that particular product happens to be highly in demand, certainly in North America and around the world, for some of the unique qualities that it possesses. So, could you talk a little bit about what's so special about SPF?
Yeah, well, SPF, it's light, it's strong, it doesn't splinter, so you can screw it, nail it, connect it. It's sustainable. And so those that strength, that lightness, it's is a nice color. It's an attractive
Hmm.
wood, and so it is very much both used in lightwood frame for that structural strength, earthquake resiliency, wind resiliency, those kinds of things. And then when you get into the mass timber piece, there's lots of projects that will have exposed CLT ceilings or
Yeah,
beams, and much of
beautiful.
that will be out of SPF or maybe a little bit of Douglas fir, and it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. And your forestry background might be able to speak to this better than I can, but if I'm not mistaken, I think some of those qualities come from kind of a mix of the cold climate that we have here in Canada and also the slow growing nature of those species. And I believe the rings are more compact when you actually look at the inside of a tree itself, and that kind of helps with the integrity of the product. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just the way that the lignum and the cellulose and all, it's all interrelated. It just makes for a strong product. It bends, but it doesn't break. So you think about a tree in a forest kind of weaving back and forth in the wind. It doesn't snap off or anything, right? Because
Right.
it's got that ability to bend and not break, which is what makes it really nice, in earthquake zones and those kinds of places.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And so talking to kind of the sustainability aspect of it, this is something, I've long been suggesting that we should do is have signs in all of the, many beautiful mass timber and exposed wood buildings that we have here in Alberta and just indicate how much carbon is stored in each of those buildings because I think it's really fascinating. And then even on that, talking about the sustainability of where our product comes from, Canada, if I'm not mistaken, has the most hectares of sustainably certified forests in the world. So we're also getting the confidence that we're getting a resource or a product derived from a very well managed resource. So if we've got the sustainability of product, we've got an incredibly high demand, high quality product. What are the barriers? Right? We've got so many opportunities to build with it. So what are the hesitance, some of the hesitation we're seeing from folks?
Yeah, so just to go back a little bit though, I just want to talk about forest management. One of the
Yeah.
things that's kind of overlooked is that in Canada, we are not, harvesting a forest and then going and planting, fast-growing eucalyptus or
Yeah.
pine, something else. We practice natural forestry. So when we go and replant our sites, and we replant them all pretty much, we're replanting back with spruce, pine, and fir. So we're restoring those native natural species back. And that's a really important thing when you think about biodiversity and habitat and those kinds of things.
Hmm.
Just wanted to touch on that a little bit
Yeah,
before.
appreciate that.
Yeah. So the barriers are, a lot of it is perception, Aspen. So, I do a little kind of thing at, cocktail parties, and when I tell people what I do, they go, "Oh yeah, that's interesting." I'll go, "Hey, how tall do you think we can build in wood?" And most people say, "Oh, I don't know, 1 or 2 stories," and when I tell them we can go 12 to 18 stories, they're blown away, right?
Hmm.
And then, so their perception is that, you don't use wood to build skyscrapers, but you can, right? Technically, you can.
Yes.
There's no
Yeah.
reason why not. People worry about fire. They always go, oh, well, if it's wood, it's going to, like won't it burn down? And when you get into these tall buildings using mass timber, of course, these are big pieces of wood, right?
Mhm.
And so we've done extensive fire testing. And, the analogy I like to use is, when we're out in our Alberta forest and we got our campfire going, what do? We put a little bit of, kindling down, we put a couple bigger pieces of wood, and then we put some firewood on. We light it up, the fire's going, and then you're just throwing your firewood on the fire. And if you walk over into the forest there and you drag a log out and you put it on your campfire, what happens? Well, that log gets kind of charred on the outside, but it doesn't burn
Mhm.
through, right? And
Yeah.
that's what mass timber does. Using kind of the examples like that, we can start to break down these perceptions that, first of all, people don't know you can go that high. Uh,
Hmm.
and then people think, well, it's going to burn down or there's going to be water damage or those kinds of things. And so, at CWC, at FP Innovations, and the universities across the country, we've been doing all this research, to show the durability of wood, to show the fire
Hmm.
characteristics of the wood. And then the final kind of thing is just the costing piece, Aspen. It's new, and when you're doing new technology and new systems, you got to learn. And so sometimes it's hard to pencil projects out to make them profitable in the beginning. But if you do, as I mentioned earlier, more projects, then you get familiar with it and you start to realize those cost savings, things like we talked about with the speed of construction,
Yeah.
lightness, those kinds of things. So that's kind of the main barriers right now. What we know, we've got data. We've been doing this for 25 years. We also work closely with our US colleagues. What we know is that the more we touch people, an architect, an engineer, a developer, a construction company, the more likely it is for them to build with wood. So, they
Hmm.
might attend, a wood solutions conference or a webinar or something, and then, we might go provide them some technical support, and then they build a project. And once they built one, we start to see this pattern where they'll build another one, and
Yeah.
then they become almost um, um, self-fulfilling in that we don't really need to convince them to build with wood anymore. We can just continue to provide them some technical support as they build more and more with wood.
Hmm.
The other limitation, Aspen, and I talk to our folks about this all the time, is there is a limited supply of wood, right? So we are not going to displace all of the concrete or all of the steel buildings in the world with wood. So we got to find out where wood is the most applicable and serves the best purposes. You know, f-
Hmm.
for those resiliency circumstances, for that GHG reduction, for those kinds of things, and be very selective about where we use the wood to help build healthier homes, more affordable homes, safer homes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to your point, while there might be, a certain volume of available timber to use in this point in time, the really, wonderful thing about this resource is that when we harvest, we are replanting and those trees are going to grow back and there's going to be kind of this continuous availability of product, just not necessarily, enough to entirely replace all other construction opportunities. But I think, something that we look at a lot is also hybrid construction, like certainly not necessarily advocating to entirely replace, one or another type of building materials, but kind of working together and how we can make a better product with a marriage between, those different materials.
Yeah, one of the things we're looking at, just hot off the press, Aspen, is that when we look at the building construction metrics in Canada, especially on the residential side, there is a tremendous amount of volume in the 19 plus floor space
Hmm.
where wood doesn't go generally. But there is a big opportunity for us to go and partner up with steel to do a timber steel hybrid system that can go 30, 40, 50, 60 stories. And the
Yeah.
good thing about that is that, steel needs to decarbonize. And so one of the ways they can do is by, replacing some of the steel or concrete components in their buildings with wood to get that reduction. But even better for them is that wood is much lighter than concrete.
Hmm.
And so all of a sudden it changes the design characteristics of these taller buildings by putting these wood floors in. And so there's a real opportunity out for us to work with steel on these hybrids as a means to, create more GHG friendly taller buildings and get into that 19 plus space. And so again, going back to innovation, that's what I like about this industry and our construction partners is that we're working very closely with them uh,
Hmm.
on innovative new systems, flooring systems, hybrids, those kinds of things, to see again how we can create these affordable, safe, low carbon buildings, whether it's residential or non-residential.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that I think is really interesting, specifically on, how tall we can build. It's been interesting to watch how around the world, this is something that has almost evolved into a little bit of a competition of who can build the tallest wood building. Like I think in Canada at one point we had the title for that. And then if I'm not mistaken, it went to Norway with a 22 something. I might be getting that number wrong, tall wood building. And now is it in the States that they have the tallest wood building?
Yeah, right now it's in Milwaukee,
Yeah.
the Ascent building. It's 25 stories. It's nine concrete and uh, s- what is it? 14, 14 wood.
Hmm.
Amazing, amazing building. So, and I think there's one in Australia now that's going to be taller than that.
Yeah.
But what we're really kind of focusing on at the Wood Council is replicable, affordable buildings that have wood as one of the
Hmm.
components. It's nice to build these one-off iconic things,
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
In order to drive demand, in order to get meaningful GHG reductions, you really do need to have replicable,
Of course. Yeah.
scalable buildings, and so we look at that quite a lot. So it
Hmm.
builds off the innovation of these where we're pushing the boundaries, and then taking that boundary pushing and crafting it into more easily applicable. So
Hmm.
not everything has to be kind of one off.
Yeah.
But it is fascinating to watch.
Yeah, well, but I mean, to that end, where we've got so many other parts of the world that are really embracing this wood culture, they're trying to build more with wood for, many of the reasons that we've discussed. I think, certainly in particular, the Scandinavian countries, it seems, have really embraced a wood culture. And so I'm curious in your travels, learning what's happening in other jurisdictions, what are some of the lessons learned in maybe those parts of the world that have been really successful with implementing a wood culture?
Yeah, sure. So, I've had the pleasure of being in Central Europe, which is kind of the home of mass timber, for the last couple of years, meeting with mass timber producers there. And what I can say there is that, there's lots to learn from them on how we can adapt, their journey to our journey. We're just starting out on this really here in Canada. And so we're able to kind of look at, scale, look at systems that they're using, the technology that they're using. We even have circumstances like Element 5 in Ontario, partnering with Haslacher, who's out of Australia or Austria, to partner up here in Canada and bring their technology and expertise here to partner up with Element 5. So we're looking a lot at those opportunities. Market conditions are a little bit different there. There's 500 million people in Europe. So you know we tend in Canada to be, especially our forests, quite far from the urban areas. So we have to, adapt, how they've been doing things to reflect those logistics. This year, we're hopefully taking a delegation of small, medium-sized enterprises to Norway and Sweden to look at what they're doing there. But one of the things that I find really fascinating about how they do it there is that they start at the city planning level.
Hmm.
And so what they do is they've got their cities, and when they're looking at development of their cities or redevelopment of their cities, they'll start the plan for wood and wood's role in those plans right from the planning scale. And so I think there's a real opportunity here in Canada
Yeah.
to do that. And we've been doing it in places like Vancouver, where in Vancouver they've got a wood first policy. And so one of the things they've just recently done is to say to developers, if you want to build with wood, we'll give you some leeway on parking spaces and we'll allow you an additional 2 floors on your building. And so that's an incentive to, get people to
Hmm.
build with wood. And it kind of goes back to this kind of building it into your city planning to start with. So in Stockholm, we're hopeful to go to the Wood City, which is one of these planning districts where it's essentially mostly mass timber construction, like they started at the planning level. And
Yeah.
so that's a big lesson learned for us. And when we want to go there and learn a little bit more from them on how we can use those planning tools to be able to make sure that we've got the right combination of low carbon materials as we build out our towns and cities.
Absolutely. And so, with all of that great knowledge, something that we are hoping to do here at home in Alberta is to implement a Build with Alberta Wood Act to, grow domestic demand right here at home. We've talked about, all of the many number of reasons why building with wood is such a choice material and why we might want to do that more here at home and incentivize that. Certainly also looking at that as an opportunity to reduce some of the trade uncertainty, as of course we're going to see some challenges with accessing the US market. So, what would be some of the things that you would share with an Alberta audience about why we should have a Build with Alberta Wood Act?
Well, first and foremost, the reason that BC has more mass timber buildings than the rest of Canada combined is because they have a Wood First Act.
Yeah.
And that Wood First Act started, in the 2006-7 era. I'll tell you just a little bit of a story. I was running the Canada Wood Group at the time, just in front of the Beijing Olympics. And so we were in China trying to convince them to build with wood. And at that time, it's changed since, but at that time, the most prevalent housing unit in China was a 6-floor apartment building. And so we were trying to convince them that, hey, you can build these 6-floor buildings out of wood.
Mm-hmm.
He said, oh, great. Why don't we come to Canada and you can show us your 6-floor buildings? Well, at that point in time, the building code only allowed 4 floors out of wood.
Right.
And so Premier Campbell at the time said, that's not good. So he came back. We'd met with him in Beijing. He came back and BC implemented a 6-floor mid-rise wood building code. And,
Mm-hmm.
and it took off. And now, almost 90% of 5 to 6 floor apartment buildings in BC are built out of wood. That's all leadership from Wood First Act and from political leaders who are saying, yes, let's use that wood. So what I would say to Alberta is that it works. If you have that kind of act, it will incentivize and get people to build more with wood.
Yeah.
Again, you get
Awesome.
that triple word score. You get
Yeah.
Alberta jobs, you get sustainable forests, using your sustainable forests and get beautiful buildings.
Yes. Right. I know you can't go wrong. Awesome. Well, my last question for you, Rick. Of course, I can't wrap up this episode without getting back to one of your first comments, which was that in all of your travels, in your observation, Canada is doing it better than anyone else. So, if you could just share with me for a few comments why that's your perspective.
Yeah, being in it for 40 years, obviously sawdust in my veins.
That's the first I've heard that. That's amazing.
Yeah. Anyways, when I talk to people, they don't understand how forestry works, really. They just think that, we wake up one morning and we go out and we go, hey, there's a stand of trees. Let's crank up the chainsaws and go fall those trees.
Hmm.
We have the most comprehensive sets of planning requirements and rules in across Canada than anywhere else in the world.
Hmm.
So, we've got professionals that go out before we even dream about cutting a tree down. We got biologists, you've got wildlife biologists, you got, water experts, soil experts, foresters, engineers. We're in conversations with indigenous peoples around incorporating indigenous knowledge. We're bringing all of that information to bear in our planning, before we even start to think about where we're gonna harvest, where we're
Hmm.
gonna build roads. And so we've got to take all those values into consideration before we're able to find areas that we can harvest. So just this incredible amount of science and data and professional committed people working to make sure that we're doing it right. And then when we go, we've got world-class, loggers, and they're going in and we always say our loggers are environmentalists. They go in,
Hmm.
they treat the land with care when they're there. When we leave, we replant, we put the roads to bed, we do habitat modification, we do all these kinds of things, post-harvest to make sure that we are regrowing those forests back. And as I said earlier, we're doing it using natural species. We're not doing plantation forestry where we're taking native species, harvesting them, and bringing in non-native species and planting them. So we're literally regrowing those forests back. And so you have these, prescriptions about how to harvest, where to harvest, what to replant with, what are the considerations, so that we know when we leave that will become a forest again.
Yeah.
And that's part of the sustainability piece. And it also is part of making sure there's forests for people to recreate in, hunt in, just enjoy, and that there's, forests there that provide biodiversity, provide wildlife habitat, and then also provide the industry with a sustainable supply of forests and material so that we can take the next step and build those low carbon, affordable, beautiful wood buildings.
Awesome. Rick, I could not have said that better myself. Thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. Maybe just before we close, if there was one last thing that you wanted to share about the Canadian Wood Council and why Canada should build more with wood.
Yeah, you know what? I think that we're doing a good job, but we've been looking lately. We have a tariff problem.
Hmm.
We have a problem around, we're highly dependent on the US. You know, Canadian Wood Council, we have very stringent key performance indicators, KPIs, that measure the impact of what we do. Currently, we're responsible for creating about 350 million board feet of incremental demand every year through the activities that we deliver through the Canadian Wood Council and with our partners at Woodworks. We've been modeling that out, and when we look at things like 7 to 18 floors, warehouses, low-rise commercial, long-term care, schools, institutional, we think we can grow that incremental demand from 350 million board feet per year to 1 billion board feet a year, and
Wow.
keep more of that, more of our wood and our wood products here in Canada, and diversify our industry by growing our domestic markets,
Hmm.
and reducing our reliance on the U.S. markets. And so we've got that, I call it the money shot, 350 to 1 billion. And so our challenge and what we're really pumped up about at the Wood Council right now is, what do we need to do with what we've been doing to this point in time to be able to get ourselves from that 350 to that billion? And so that's where we're all excited right now, is we think that's real doable. There's no technical barriers to do it. So let's get out there and do it.
Wow. Rick, that is awesome. I can't wait to hear more. Maybe we'll have to check in on the progress of the 1 billion board feet in another episode. But this has been so fantastic, so much fun, so informative. I really appreciate you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Aspen, for having me on today, and have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. If you enjoyed this episode of Forestry Talks and you're curious to learn even more about Canadian forest products, the demand for them, and some of the opportunities and innovation going on in this space, I'd really encourage you to check out 2 of our previous episodes. We were previously joined by Bruce St. John, the president of Canada Wood, and a few seasons ago we had on Andre Lima from Western Artrib. Western Artrib is an Alberta-based business, and they build bigger with mass timber. As always, if you're curious to learn even more about forestry in Alberta, check out our website, albertaforestproducts.ca, or follow us at Alberta Forests.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, visit our website at road55.ca.